Stanford University.
Yeah, cool. All right. My name is Evan Dahl. I am here to talk to you about Flipboard, which is an app for the iPad, and it's also a company that I started about a year ago. Prior to doing Flipboard, I was actually one of the first instructors of CS193P. So this was in the fall of 2008 and the spring of 2009. You can still find those lectures on iTunes if you want to skip ahead and act like you know what's going on before the rest of the class does. And I used to work at Apple. I worked on pro video and photo applications for a few years, and then I worked on the iPhone team from the first version up through version 3. So spent some time at Apple, and then I left to go and do my own thing, and now I'm working on Flipboard. So today we're going to talk about, I'm going to explain a little bit of the sort of rationale behind Flipboard, what we were trying to accomplish as we were designing the app. And then I'm going to talk about some of the specific design and engineering choices that we made as we were building the app, and kind of give you maybe some guideposts as you're thinking about what goes into building an iPad application. And then I'm going to sort of talk about what we're thinking about going forward for the company, for the product, and for the platform. So starting with why Flipboard, this is my co-founder. His name's Mike McHugh. He actually wrote one of the very first VRML plugins for a browser. Does anyone here know what VRML is? It was really hot stuff in the mid-90s, virtual reality markup language. He worked at Netscape. He was a VP at Netscape. And then he went off and founded this company called Tell Me, which did a lot of really cool stuff around voice services and trying to make everything on the internet accessible via telephone. And then we met last summer, spring, and decided to start working together. Mike's whole thing is taking a cool idea and then trying to make it 10 times bigger and trying to step back. And rather than trying to zoom in on a really focused subset of the problem, is to think about it in crazy big terms that everyone else is sort of either too smart or too too rational to think about. And then you actually end up potentially in kind of interesting places where others might fear to tread. So Mike loves to think big. He loves to sort of take impossible problems and try to bite them off and see what happens. So his background, Netscape, Tell Me, he's the Flipboard CEO. And our first sort of thought experiment was to kind of reimagine the web and think about what the web could be or should be if you were to kind of throw away everything you know about it and take into account a lot of what we know now about what people the value that people get out of the web, how social is so important. And we're kind of, a lot of folks are trying to sort of add social into the browser or sort of, glue it to the side of the browser. But what if social stuff were more inherently part of what browsing was? And also thinking about design. The web as we know it right now is very, if you look at it and you compare it to print, it's a pretty unsatisfying experience. And you think about how design has sort of become, it's gotten more in the forefront of what people expect from products. If you think 10, 15 years ago, we were all happily, no offense to the Windows PC that I'm using to present this from, but many of us were happily using products that maybe weren't, that didn't incorporate great design as a sort of fundamental building block of the product and a fundamental reason why we used the product. So thinking a lot about visual design, interaction design. So here's what a typical article looks like in a web browser right now. And there's just so much going on the screen. There's a lot of content that's being squeezed into this very small box, just because it's technically possible. So why not do it? There's these bars going down the sides. There's lots of ads to sort of draw your eye away from the content, and the actual content is kind of shoehorned into this very small box on the screen. You compare this to a magazine experience where the content is allowed to breathe and use the full page, and the ads actually get the same treatment. They're allowed to use the full page as well. So rather than sort of competing with each other, and being a zero-sum game, the great thing about print is that they're each allowed to do their own thing in their own space. And you can also look at how social, there's so much great stuff that comes at you from sources like Facebook and Twitter. But if you look at it in this sort of the standard computer science mentality mindset of this infinite scrolling list of text, it's not very scannable, it's not very digestible. You've got to spend a lot of energy and time to filter this yourself and to click on the links and open up the tabs, and pretty soon you're just jumping between all these different places, and it's not very easy to sort of skim the maximum value in a really short amount of time. So it can be pretty overwhelming, especially for non-geeky folks. So we wanted to try and focus on beautiful content and try to fight information overload. And like I said, magazines, I think, do a lot of great things here. Both on the design side, they use typography and photography and great art direction and great layouts to direct your eye and to make this vast inflow of information not feel overwhelming. You can pick up an issue of Time magazine and it doesn't scare you. It's something you can finish. It's not this infinitely updating, real-time streaming thing. It's not something that adds to your anxiety about the everyday world. And then editorial as well is really important. You've got people who are helping to filter down all of the new stuff in the world into those 60 pages, right? It's not just every single new thing that happened gets equal treatment. There's an opinion, there's a voice behind it. And so taking the great things about print and combining them with how social media is like so personalized, and there's always something new if you want to see something new. So we tried to basically create what we call a social magazine, trying to combine the best of both worlds. It's personalized for you. So inherently, by virtue of the fact that you're connected with people that you think are interesting and people that you care about, you're able to, you don't have to go in and sort of set all your preferences and say, I'm interested in classic wooden boats and UFOs and bacon. It's more inherently personalized. You don't have to set it all up yourself. So this is Flipboard. If you haven't seen it before, it's an app for the iPad. It's got a magazine cover that shows recent photos that your friends have uploaded or that they've linked to. These could be photos associated with news stories, or they could just be standalone photos. It's got a table of contents where you can see the sources that you've chosen to subscribe to. And you can, as you dive into a section, you can browse content in this very, very visual way that we try to, like I said before, we don't want all this new stuff coming at you from these infinitely updating sources to feel overwhelming. We want it to be comfortable and familiar in the way that print is familiar. So one thing, so we thought about these ideas, and we thought about this idea of a social magazine, and really, we don't claim to have invented any of it. A lot of these ideas already existed, and we just sort of tried to harness them together and put them into a package where the greatest number of people could get benefit from it. Mike's old former CEO from Netscape, this guy Jim Barksdale, he has a quote that I really like, which is, you see a parade forming in the middle of the street. You see a bunch of people starting to create a parade. Jump in front of it. Act like you know what you're doing. Start marching, and people will follow you. So it's kind of a matter of just embracing the opportunity when you see it. So that's a little bit of the motivation for the product. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the specific choices and the design philosophy and how that translated into specific decisions in the product. And there's a little bit of an engineering side to this, but there's a design side. Engineering and design have to be very tightly integrated. Otherwise, there's a lot that isn't possible. So kind of the three main principles that we wanted to really anchor ourselves to with Flipboard were that we wanted it to be really fast, we wanted it to be really beautiful, and we wanted it to be inherently social from the ground up. Now it's easy to say, yeah, we want it to be fast. It's very easy to come up with adjectives like this. It's more difficult to take these adjectives and really hold on to them and use them to inform the design of the product in a really real way. So I'm going to give you some examples of how we were able to incorporate these principles into the design. First of all, as far as speed goes, the first thing that you can do is make the content scannable. Like I said before, when I showed that sort of vertical, text-heavy scrolling list of social media content, that's not very scannable. You've got to do a lot of context switching to dive into the content and figure out what's actually worth your time. So by turning some of that content inside out and showing content previews to indicate to you what's worth your time and what's not, this adds to speed. This isn't the kind of thing that you necessarily tune with instruments or Shark. It's sort of a more, how does the user experience and how does the workflow allow you to get benefit more quickly from the app. It's also aggregated. We tie together multiple content sources. Facebook and Twitter are in the same place, so you don't have to jump between these different places. In the future, you're going to see us adding more services so you don't have to necessarily leave Flipboard if you want to consume the different sources of content that are being shared with you. We try to preload as much as we can. So when you're flipping through the app, you're not waiting for pages to load. I mean, think about how a web browser works, and there's this expectation that you click on a link and you sit there and the little spinny spins around. And we take that for granted as engineers and as power-using hackers, but really we should be a little bit more intelligent about predicting what content people want to see. And then finally, really, and this is where it gets down to the micro optimizing your for loops is making it feel as fast as a physical object, so that when you touch something, it moves right away, and it doesn't take a half second to catch up to your finger. This doesn't necessarily mean pure sort of realism to the extent that it's a social magazine, but there's no subscription card that's blown into the seam of the magazine that sort of falls out on your lap. But there are a lot of really great things about physical objects that are especially noticeable on a platform like the iPad, where it's large enough to feel like it should have a mapping to something that you've used in the real physical world. So this is a case where you've got to take out the hardcore performance tools and the debugging tools and really ruthlessly optimize the performance. And if you wait until sort of the last stages of the project to think about performance here, you're going to have big problems. You've got to sort of treat performance as a feature. It's not sort of an asterisk that gets listed after the real list of features. It should be one of those top-level things that you're trying to accomplish with the product. So one example of speed, or at least perceived speed in the app that I really like, is the fact that we show you this magazine cover. And you fire up the app and you see this cover, and it's panning or it's zooming, doing the sort of Ken Burns effect on the image. It cycles through lots of images that are being shared by your friends. So right now, this is an image from Yay Every Day, and there's lots of other sources where their images are going to be shown on the cover. And the nice thing about this is that you're sitting here, you're twiddling your thumbs and saying, oh, wow, so-and-so, they have a baby, and they just posted their baby photo. And you're sitting here looking at this stuff. And in the meantime, the app is going out and updating all of your feeds in the background. So we sort of trick you into going into sort of la-di-da, twiddle your thumbs and whistle for a minute, while we're able to do a lot of work in the background such that when you flip past the cover, the content is ready to go. So oftentimes perception is as important as reality when it comes to speed. Now in terms of sort of the aesthetics of the app, we think back to that web article example that I gave. The content is really sort of shoehorned in by all of this other stuff, this Chrome and sort of navigation and advertising. And we really wanted to make the content the primary thing in the app. And we wanted to actually make the content the interface. There shouldn't be lots of Chrome and lots of buttons and lots of sort of visual decorations and adornment around stuff. You think about a magazine, and there's really not much user interface there. You're pretty much touching pure content. So we wanted to try and bring some of that into the app and not make a sort of pejorative term that you'll hear a lot in our office when we're talking about design and new features is appiness. If something is too app-like or too appy, that's kind of a put down when we're talking about design. If it feels like an app rather than a physical object, it's we consider that to be a shortcoming. And then also more than just text. we use all these web services and web apps. You go to your RSS client, and it's just text, 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 text. And we go to our consoles, and it's text, 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 text. And that's, it's a comfortable environment for a lot of us because we're all big nerds, and we like to read just screens full of text. But there's something really great about focusing on imagery, and whether that's photos, art, or even just really great use of color and typography. Typography, can take text and turn it into something that feels like art, or that feels like a visual element on the page. And I think that's really important to make the app both look great and also not overwhelm you with too much content. It also serves a speed purpose as well. So thinking about photos, thinking about graphics, not just making it all about text. And then also randomness is really important. Adding in some variety so that it doesn't feel like you're using something that was designed by a machine or that was algorithmically created. Our page layouts in the app, we really try to incorporate randomness. And if you've seen a page layout before, we try not to use it going forward. We try to shuffle things around. And actually this, there's a lot that I think we try to share with like the shuffle feature on an iPod. And you think about how when iPods were getting really big and people were, they were sort of becoming this cultural thing. And there were these articles in newspapers where people were like, the shuffle feature on the iPod knows what I'm thinking. It knows what to play next. It knows to play these 2 songs from my high school prom right after, that are totally unrelated except for, they make sense to me. And really, the iPod is just, it's doing a random shuffle and it's playing the songs. There's no mind reading to it. But people read a lot into this random order. So you can do a similar thing with laying out content that people are sharing with you. You can, even if it's random, and you choose to put a certain article in a really prominent position on the page, people will say, wow, how did you know to make this article like the featured thing, like the one important one, like you put it right in the right spot. And there's a little bit of a cause and effect reversal sometimes because maybe you think it's more important just because it was put in the bigger box on the page. So a lot of psychology that goes into this sort of stuff. Yeah, this is an example of just, there's such great imagery out there that people are sharing. Again, this is Yay Every Day, which is this awesome just sort of visual inspiration site, blog, Twitter account. And browsing their content in this sort of an interface, it feels much more like, like flipping through like one of those really cool designy art magazines. If you look at this content in a typical feed reader, it kind of sucks the emotion out of it. It's a lot more fun to browse in this sort of a context. And then finally on the social side, one really big decision that we made early on was to not natively include support for RSS. Now that's something that a lot of people ask for, and eventually it's going to make sense to integrate with RSS. But we liked it as a sort of stake in the ground to say we're going to make a reader app that doesn't do RSS. Put that constraint down and see where that led us. And we really think that Twitter and Facebook and these other social services where you can share and like and retweet and comment and recommend things, these are sort of the new RSS. They're a social RSS. And so we really wanted to put those ideas, in particular Twitter and Facebook, at the forefront of the app, and not allow you to sort of fall back to RSS as a crutch, as it were. So everything that you see in Flipboard is shared with you by somebody. It doesn't just come at you from this anonymous source. There's a person behind it. And you think about, I like to read the New Yorker, and I don't necessarily care about some of the topics that they write about beforehand, but just by virtue of the fact that they thought it was worth writing about, it becomes more interesting to me. Or if a friend of mine shares some web article about some, honeybees going extinct, that a friend shares that article with me because my friend shared it with me, and I know that I'm going to see them on Friday, and they're going to want to know what I thought about this article. It becomes more relevant to me. So it's not just this algorithmic, what is the perfect way of computing the most interesting thing. People have a huge role to play here. We also wanted to make it really easy to participate. So within the app, liking and sharing and commenting, retweeting, all that stuff is usually just a tap or two away. So we didn't want it to just be a passive, lean back, consume stuff experience, because by liking and retweeting and commenting, you are actually acting as a curator. You're helping to filter down the vastness of the internet for the people who follow you. And so it's not just like a one-directional relationship like a standard magazine. You're actually becoming an editor yourself. And then, like I was mentioning before, it's inherently personalized because you're following people and sources that you've by virtue of following, that following comes back to you as personalization. So that, if you're really into Bigfoot hunting, your magazine becomes about Bigfoot hunting. And you didn't have to necessarily go in and tell the app that you were interested in, paranormal phenomena. So finally, just a couple of ideas and thoughts about what's next for us, for publishing, for content online. I'm just going to talk about 3 ideas. The first one is that social sharing and discovery is so important. It's so universal. You think about how people for a long time have been clipping newspaper articles and writing a little note and mailing them, or they've been emailing links or photos around. And now you can use these social services to do the same thing, to find content and curate it for others. And there's a lot of really great individual curators on services like Twitter and other places online who are effectively acting as magazine editors. It may not look like that when you go to their Twitter homepage, but if you view their content through the right lens, somebody like Maria Popova, who has the best Twitter feed I've ever seen, she just all day long finds cool art, culture, design, visual inspiration, and she posts links to it. And you look at her feed in Flipboard, and it's just this awesome, one-woman magazine. And we love the idea of being something that is conducive to that, and we think that should be improved. Going forward, it should be possible for someone like her to truly be a one-person magazine and be recognized, and maybe even get paid for being an awesome tweeter of cool stuff that people like to view and share. You don't necessarily need a vast publishing empire to reach people with your taste and your editing and your sense of curation. So the second idea, which I think is really interesting, is thinking about ads as content. You think about really great magazines like Vogue and Wired, and the ads are so beautiful and they're so well targeted to you that they don't necessarily feel like an intrusion. They don't feel like so many of the ads on the web where you're trying to read some article and there's this flashing thing at the top asking you, to click on the monkey to save 10% on your car insurance. And they don't compete. They support the content in magazines. There's Old Spice Guy. I don't know if you guys are people familiar with Old Spice Guy. This whole series of sort of YouTube videos, it sort of became this social phenomenon where people were commenting and making suggestions, and they would actually make new versions of the commercial and post them on YouTube based on these crazy suggestions that people had. You think about Super Bowl commercials as well. They're the types of content that people will post on a sharing site. They will comment on it. They will like it. If the content is good enough, it doesn't matter that it's an ad. And then finally, really just thinking about the types of advertising that people talk about. And you're never going to have a water cooler conversation with someone about that awesome text ad that you saw last night, and like, oh, wasn't that crazy, that text that they had in that text ad? I think Don Draper said, text ads won't make you drink Coca-Cola. He didn't actually say that. But it's a limitation of the web as we know it because it's so text-centric. And then you look at the types of advertising that haven't really made it to the web yet. Brand advertising, the picture of the model drinking the bottle of Coca-Cola with like the dewdrops of glistening moisture on it. You don't see that on the web right now. Or if you do, it's not as satisfying as it is on a billboard or in a magazine. A a lot of really great and valuable ads are still in the non-digital world. So trying to make advertising more social, more beautiful, and keep it from competing with the content and allowing it to sit alongside the content in a way that doesn't make you feel like your eyeballs are being just sold to the highest bidder. And then finally, we've got this idea about the sort of paradox of tablets, particularly from a publisher point of view. There's a lot of demand for native iPad experiences in apps. People want, they clamor for, they don't just want to go to your website, they want something that lives and breathes the platform that they're using, whether it's an iPhone or an iPad or some other device. At the same time, though, users are asking for this, but they don't want an app for every site that they go to. I mean, I think about the number of blogs and sites that I visit and that I subscribe to, and I don't want to have to learn a different application user interface for each one. It doesn't make sense. And I don't want to have a home screen full of icons for every single content source that I care about. So there's a real need for tying things together. And then also, publishers, it doesn't make sense for every single magazine and newspaper to hire a CTO and build a team of awesome iOS app developers and have them make this cool custom thing in-house. It's crazy to expect that everyone should be able to do that. So we think that there's a lot of value in acting as a central place where content publishers can put their content in, and it feels like a native iPad experience, but it doesn't require them to reinvent the wheel. So we think that's really important. So finally, there are a lot of crazy opportunities and risks here right now as we're looking at how publishing and online content is sort of reinventing itself and figuring out how content publishers and creators are going to get recognized and get paid for what they do. Because these businesses, they take money to run, and newspapers are closing up shop, and we certainly, we want to do everything we can to try and reverse that trend and allow content creators to do their job and make a living and be rewarded for what they do. But so much of this is you're just charging into the unknown. We don't know how online content is going to look in 5 years, 10 years, let alone 5 months. So it's a really fun place to be. And yeah, we really want to try and fundamentally improve the experience of consuming content online. We don't just want to make an app. We don't just want to sell it for 99 cents. We want to build something that actually fundamentally improves the daily experience of as many people as possible. And one of our investors, John Doerr, said to Mike when he was getting ready to start his next company, he said, whatever you do something important. Don't just go off and try to make a buck. Do something that actually has a real world impact. This is my grandma using her iPad. And I love making a product that she's able to use on a daily basis and get value out of. There is value in making some sort of super vertical B2B tool for selling ergonomic shoes to people who own iguanas or something. But I love making something that speaks to a sort of universal human urge. In this case, it's sharing and talking about what's new and interesting together. It's not just you and your isolated tunnel of subscriptions. It's social sharing. And she's the one who still mails me newspaper clippings with notes attached to them. And that's I think that's sort of the same DNA as a tweet with a link. So do something important, have fun while you're doing it, and get it out there to the masses and see what they think about it. So here's my contact info, my Twitter username, that is. If you're interested in chatting, if you have ideas, if you want a summer internship, or you want to something more than that, drop us a line. We're here in Palo Alto, just about a block away from the fresh yogurt. So yeah, we're in the neighborhood, and we'd love to hear what you think and all that. So thank you. Any questions, comments? Yeah.
So you mentioned partnering with publishers and content creators.
Yeah.
Is that the business model, or is it something else?
So the question was, we mentioned partnering with publishers. Is that the business model? You know, as far as what the specific business model is, we're taking the time to sort of get that right, and we don't want to sort of break glass for nearest business model just because we have to. We've got great investors who are in this for the long haul with us, and they aren't pushing us to, make a quick buck by, selling, something for to the highest bidder. So I mean, we definitely are working on relationships with content publishers, and we're trying to build something that is as good for the big guys, the established media companies, as it is for small individual content creators like the Maria Popovas of the world. But it takes time to to convince everyone that you're trying to better the entire ecosystem and you're not just trying to make a buck for yourself. So we're working on that. It takes a lot of time, but we're hoping that by being closer to content publishers, we can better serve them and we can better serve the users as well. We don't necessarily see, I mean, certainly there are business model implications when you talk about working with content publishers. Any sort of revenue that we were to make in the future with the app is something that we want to share with content publishers because it just doesn't make sense any other way. But I don't know that it would be a situation where we build a white label version of Flipboard that some publisher is able to sell and then we get a cut of that or something. I think we're trying to stay away from that sort of an approach. Any other questions? Yeah.
I guess something that popped up to me when you were talking about the ads, first of all, was the idea that you have a very text-based environment when you're browsing through a website.
Right. And
even if you can have that sort of beautiful ad that you get a lot of times in magazines with the model and the Dewey and whatever, that really contrasts with maybe the text base of the website. So, is it more that it just doesn't fit in with the website structure we have right now, and you guys are trying to change that because an image, when you have a lot of other images that you're already looking through, kind of makes more sense?
Yeah. So the question is, why is there such a problem integrating like this really great sort of magazine-y advertising into the web as we know it right now? And that's a good question. I mean, you see, it's not just text ads on the web. There's banners, which have their own set of problems. They allow you to be a little bit more visual, but they're, like in that online article example, they push the content down and they push the content, and pretty soon, like you go to the web page and the article isn't actually on the page until you scroll down, about 1,000 pixels or something. And then there are some more visual ads that, the ones that like you go to the site and it takes over the screen for 30 seconds and you've got to watch the video. And that's unsatisfying in a different way because, it's sort of inserting itself between you and the content, and you've got to like click, hit the escape button a bunch of times to like get out of it. And it doesn't feel that way with magazines. It's a much less sort of in-your-face approach, and it's hard to put your finger on what exactly it is that's different about magazine in that sense. Yeah, I think because it's so fluid and so it's not like you're committing when you go to view something. You're able to sort of glance, and the cost of looking at a page in a magazine is very low. And you think about the cost of viewing a web page in your browser, and it's higher than you can't just like do this really quick thumbing through things. So it's subtle. And the amounts of the time differences are not huge. Web browsers are pretty fast. We've all got broadband connections, but it's something, I guess, it's more on this sort of thinking about the design of the product and making it scannable more so than like pure performance. And there's also there's a lot of expectations about what a website should be. And actually, we were initially thinking about making Flipboard as a web app and putting it in the browser. And I think we were very fortunate to sort of think about it a little bit. And then the iPad was announced. And at the time, it was a huge risk for us to say, maybe we should come out with the first version of this for the iPad. Like, we don't know how many people are going to buy them. What if it's the next Mac Cube and Apple sells 100,000 and it sort of dies a slow death? It felt very risky at the time. Now, obviously, it seems sort of like, oh, obviously, make it for the iPad, but it was not that clear to us at the time. But I think that getting out of there are just so many expectations about what a web app should be that we were able to escape by building an iPad app. And the type of people who buy an iPad are the type of people who are going to be receptive to this sort of like new experience and making an app it's not quite an RSS reader, and it's not really a Twitter client, and it's not a magazine, and it's not really a web browser, but it sort of takes elements of all of these and tries to invent a new genre, which is,
I personally since the coffee house, you just threw their feed of interest.
Yeah. So that was sort of the thinking there. It's obviously there would be a lot of great things about trying to take some of Flipboard and putting it into the browser, but in the same way that we didn't take a web experience and shoehorn it into the iPad, we shouldn't necessarily take the iPad experience and try to recreate it pixel for pixel in the browser. So it's a good question. Yeah?
How do you balance like putting features in with keeping it nice and clean and easy to use? Like you don't want to jam all these buttons in there.
Yeah. So the question is, how do we keep things sort of minimalistic and clean, and how do we say no to features? It's really hard. You've got to have. I think that's one of the things that Steve Jobs is best at, is that he says no to so many great ideas because the reality is, if you have an app and you pack it to the gills with every great idea that you've had, it may be full of great ideas, but it's going to be a mess. So like I said, we shipped this app, version 1.0. It didn't support RSS. So it was a reader without RSS, and it was a Twitter client without a post new tweet button. And there were a lot of other features that, like, in some of our discussions, like, oh, obviously we've got to have this, and obviously we've got to have that. And I think it just requires a sort of a slightly, what's the word I'm looking for here? Sociopathic, just like, you've got to just really be willing to say no in situations where you really want to say yes. And that's it's a tough thing, in any realm, but particularly when you're building software, and it's like, what's the cost of adding another button? I mean, buttons are free. The pixels are already there. Where you like blank space on the screen. Hello, let's use it. And you've got to fight that natural urge to put a button there and say, you know what, like, there's enough buttons on the screen. Maybe there should be no buttons on the screen. But it's one of those things that, I mean, it's still a challenge for us to this day as we're figuring out how to add new features, because obviously you want to come out with the next version of the app, you want to add all this cool new stuff, and you don't want to sort of end up in this Microsoft Word 2010 mode where there's 8,000 menu items and sort of it's gotten progressively more complex. Well, one thing that I've been talking about with the folks I work with is it would be really cool to like remove a feature every major release. Like, take some feature that maybe doesn't fit in so much anymore, or that like there's another way to do it, and just like cut it out. Obviously, that's the kind of thing that causes millions of people to join petitions on Facebook saying, "Make it the way it was, otherwise we're going to all close our Facebook accounts." It's a tricky thing when you've got users who have expectations about the product. But I think it's there should be no sacred cows. Otherwise, you end up just with this big ball of goo that's been, massing itself together. I don't know if I actually answered your question. Basically, the answer is that it's really hard, and you've got to and there has to be a voice on your team who is sort of repeating the mantra of like, do we really need to add this? Like, how can we not add this?
Is it more that you decide not to add something, or that you find some other clever way of putting it in without making it messy?
Sometimes that. I mean, so one thing that people have asked for in the app and that we thought we needed was a refresh button, because our browser has a refresh button, and when I want new data, I want a refresh button that allows me to get the new stuff. And we went back and forth on that a lot, and ultimately decided that there's no refresh button in a magazine. Again, the magazine metaphor is tricky because you end up with subscription cards and like torn address labels on the front, and if you go too far. But the new issue comes in the mail when there's new stuff. So along the same lines, we decided we're going to have a refresh interval that we feel is sort of right for the product, given the amount of time that people spend in the product, and we'll just make the content sort of automatically update when when that interval has been reached. That being said, we were very conscious to not do automatic refreshing when you're inside a section, when you're actually, we don't want content to change underneath you. There's nothing more frustrating than reading something and then like the reload happens and everything is like shuffled around. So in the app right now, refresh only happens when you navigate back to the table of contents, and it only happens once every right number of minutes, which we tweak depending on the kind of usage that we're seeing and the kind of server resources that we have and lots of things that go into that. So yeah, that's the example, I guess. Anything else? Yeah.
What do you guys think of Pulse? Are they in the same space?
Mm-hmm. So the question is, what do we think of Pulse? I think Pulse is a great app. And, I mean, there's a lot of pretty killer like news readers out there for the iPad. They're all kind of taking their own spin on things. Ultimately, we want to, like I was saying before, we want to build something that, it may sound hokey or whatever, but we want to kind of transcend appness. And, ultimately our goal is not to build an app. It's to change and improve, online content and the experience of discovering and enjoying and sharing online content. So we're trying to, not really limit ourselves to just thinking about it as an app or even as a suite of apps. That may sound like kind of a non-answer. Pulse is great. I think we have different priorities, and you'll hopefully see some of that going forward. All right, I think we've got to wrap up. Thank you again. It was fun.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.